Kia ora, councillors. Let's get back to business. Now, we're down to, we've just finished item 20. Councillor Wilson, you want to move something?
I move that we get the report on the waiver. I'm happy to now withdraw that or to move that we don't deal with that paper, because I understand from staff that it can be dealt with in an alternative way, and it's very much on the top of their minds what that section 36 means.
So, right, you're moving that. So, just in essence, you're moving that we withdraw item 21 from the agenda.
If that's the easiest way of doing it, yes.
Well, that's what you're moving.
Yes.
Yep. Second to Councillor Gary. Can you just explain, for the benefit of everyone who may not have been listening, as I was?
Section 36AA is a particularly difficult way, and how it's interpreted depends on the worldview of how statutes are read. And I have now had discussions with staff, and I think that they are more or less on the same page of understanding where I was coming from with it. And its effect of having a new 2GP. But I understand staff can deal with it in a different mechanism than requiring it this way.
So, given that we've confirmed the agenda, I need to put this to the vote. So, the motion is that we withdraw item 21 from the agenda. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Right, we're on to item 22 in that case, adoption of fees and charges. Mr Toombs.
Which one are we up to? Every time I turn my computer on, it goes back to 0.
Welcome. Do you wish to introduce this in any way, Mr Toombs?
I don't think I need to, no.
No, okay.
Just referring it to the paper, obviously the fees and charges were presented to the January meeting and they were endorsed for consultation. There's just a couple of changes that have been noted in numbers 8 and 9.
But other than that, they're the same?
But other than that, they're the same, correct.
Yes. Okay. All right, I'll open it up to questions in that case. Councillor Wilson.
Sorry, I just want to check, and I meant to do this in light of the EV charge car park being $60, just comparing that to other car park charges like mobility parking. And is that the same rate? Sorry. So if you park incorrectly in the mobility, I just wanted to understand the comparison. I'm sorry, I forgot to check that.
Yes, it is. I can't tell you off the top of my head the exact infringement fee for parking on a mobility park, but it is comparable.
Comparable, because when we set a new one like this, I'd hate to see that we actually, as much as I have a great passion for people being in EV cars, I think that mobility one is possibly underscored in comparison, and I just want to make sure of that. So I'll keep on looking.
Councillor Lord.
Yes, probably not for Adrian, but it was just page 177 of the agenda, the backflow prevention program, backflow testing fees. And I just wanted to know if this is not, it's not planned to start testing all the rural supplies like we had a few years ago. A few years ago there was Mr Ian Bryant come and spoke to Public Forum about it and the cost implications.
We have been testing rural supplies, but not charging. It's quite a straightforward test, whereas in the urban environment, it's a bit different.
Okay, thank you. And there's no intention to change that at this stage. Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, if someone would like to move the recommendation. Councillor Hall. Is there a second to Councillor Newell? Do you wish to speak to this, Councillor Hall? Councillor Newell, any other speakers? Councillor Vandervis?
Keep it very brief as usual. This is double the rate of inflation and it's been cumulative for many years now. The value argument for raising fees in this way hasn't been made, and I don't believe that it's justifiable. Raising things by inflation might be, This certainly isn't. That's the reason I have to vote against.
Any other speakers? There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Thank you. Right, so that's 22. Now we go back to funding requests. So that's back to item 10.
Your
And-
Worship, I just want to note that I will be sitting back for the Broad Bay Boating
Right.
Club item.
Right. Okay, if we get to those, could you remind Jenny again, just so, rather she doesn't have to remember it all the way through. Now, if we, let's go through the list, actually. This is the list of funding requests to council over and above what had already been budgeted. So we'll just start with the process I'd like is if anyone is of a mind to want to move in any of these, or want to move in any direction for that matter, put up your hand and tell me what you want to move, and then we can debate it. So we'll start with Okaha Ngaitahu.
Your Worship, I'd like to move that we include $250,000 annually in the budget to support that in response to that application.
Okay, is there a seconder for that? Councillor Laufiso? Okay, Councillor Hawkins, do you wish to speak to it?
I would. There was a fantastic, one of my favourite signs that I saw yesterday, and there were many around the country at the Teachers Union strike, the NZEI and PPTA strike. There was a young Māori teacher wearing a shirt and written on the back, it had the list of things the functions she was expected to fulfil as a Māori teacher in the public education system, which include, but are not limited to, a kapahaka tutor, counsellor, tikanga expert, dialer porphyry, human dictionary, translation service, karakia master, bicultural professional development service, token Māori, and the how to hangi. Now, these are all the things and all of the functions that she was expected to perform within her public service role for free. And at the beginning of this meeting, I mentioned that my priorities in terms of where we would allocate resourcing through this process were to give effect to our commitments to sustainability and te tiriti o Waitangi. And the first of these has been well canvassed through the climate change work and through public transport and other means. This is the single most effective thing that we can do in terms of supporting the other. I think as an organisation, this kind of investment is long overdue, and I acknowledge that we are making progress in this work, and I applaud Dr. Bidrose for the leadership in supporting that, and we have a senior Māori advisor on staff now, and that is fantastic. But we're still far too reliant on one paid employee, and more importantly on the support of our local runaka and iwi and their volunteer labour. They are volunteering their time effectively for us to be able to fulfil our obligations under Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And we wouldn't expect our lawyers to work for free. We wouldn't expect our engineers to work for free. And so why would we expect the staff that we need and the support that we need for whether that's cultural advice or whatever to be provided for free by the people ultimately that we are supposed to be supporting in this work. The other thing that I think is worth noting here is that it's not a request for a grant in the traditional sense. It's a request for co-investment essentially in the form of a partnership, and that Okaha have come to us. The iwi have come to us and said, if you put in $250,000 in our budget, we will match that, which I think is very generous of them, actually, and makes it a remarkably good investment on our part. And, you know, if it's a good enough model to use to fund a swimming pool, it's a good enough model to fund our obligations and our aspirations around giving effect to Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So I'm pleased to be able to have the opportunity to speak to this. I mean, it's unfortunate that we don't have any Māori elected members to be able to speak to this work, mā tāwaka, let alone mana whenua. And hopefully that is something that will resolve itself through subsequent democratic processes. But in the meantime, the least that I can do as tauiwi is support this work by resourcing it. Thank you.
Thank you. For the speakers, Councillor Vandervis.
Treaty settlements and service agreements with Maori have traditionally been paid through our taxes, and there has been an extraordinary amount of money goes into that iwi industry. My question really is, what service do ratepayers and renters get from this proposed rate-paid investment?
Well, the mover can answer that in his right of reply.
So is this question time, or are we just having one crack at talking about this?
We could have...
I'll spare you the trouble. I'll deal with any questions as they come up in my right of reply.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. So you can respond to that one now, if you like.
Oh,
So he...
yeah, okay. So given that I can't see, and certainly nothing is specified that would be of direct benefit to ratepayers and renters in our city, and given that all the ratepayers and renters of the city, their taxes already go to enormous Treaty of Waitangi obligations and settlements, I fail to see why we are even contemplating using ratepayers' funds as yet another line of funding for treaty settlement or other treaty issues. The 250 annually that's going to be co-funded is going to be for what exactly? It seems to me to be something along the lines of the paid seats that the ORC have just allowed in one of their committees, voting rights and paid positions, basically for people who are essentially racially chosen or chosen by their iwi. It's not democratic. It's not what you would call transparent in any way. This cool $250,000 every year for an unspecified set of partnership activities and projects is not something which I believe we could even contemplate without first knowing what those activities and projects were, getting a report on them, and seeing if there was actually any value to ratepayers paying for it. Therefore, I don't see how anybody could actually vote for this with ratepayers' funds.
Councillor Wilson.
Kia ora. Can I just, because we haven't got question time, can I ask a question of the CEO in respect to this?
Sure.
Just to understand her understanding of what this fund may be used for. And I've had the pleasure of sitting on the Māori Participation Working Party, gosh, it might even get a new name one day soon, for many years. But hearing their involvement and their input frequently into things that we do, I'm just wondering, is this about them turning up and with their kapahaka groups, or is it about when we want to do plans, when we want to do a stormwater drain realignment and we have to mandatorily work through that process? This gives us an efficient way to work through that process that we can expect them to work in our timeframes rather than for free at their timeframes. At what level are we talking about?
So I'll say a couple of things and then I'll get Sandy. She's got this. Have you got the submission from Kaitahu where they sought the funding? Can you look that up? Okay, so their submission talks about what they expect us, but let me be really clear, this is not about a settlement for the Treaty of Waitangi breaches, for the habitual breaches over many decades that Pākehā have committed against iwi. It's got nothing to do with Treaty of Waitangi breaches. It is about Kaitahu is our treaty partner, and at the moment we regularly, for free, seek support from them for things that we do in order to meet our obligations as partners and governing this city together. So some of it is for that, but Sandy can give you some of the details about exactly what their thoughts are in terms of the spend over and above the in-house person we've got working on some of this.
Thank you, Chief. And through the Chair, I spoke with Ngāi Tahu just to clarify in advance of deliberations how they would intend the money to be used. And Councillor Wilson is correct. It would be to fund resource for things like input into the design of the central city, working with us on art and infrastructure projects, doing the work required to assess resource consents when we're required to have mana whenua input through statutory processes. Akaha are not resourced to do that adequately at the moment. So what Ngāi Tahu are looking to do is to co-fund with various organisations across the region in a partnership style approach where we commit money, they commit money, and they are able to build resource and capability.
So would I be also correct in would I also be correct in understanding that an investment of this kind will actually facilitate quicker decision making and better decision making with people with the right skills, rather than trying to work our way through who's available to do this work for free? Because I've also heard how they're finding the resourcing of the people who are competent to do this stuff difficult.
Our anticipation is that it would be more efficient, it would be fairer, and it would make for far better decision making.
And potentially cost savings.
Potentially cost savings, but I can't.
No,
I can't comment on that at the moment.
So just so we don't end up at the end of this not being of one mind about the process, I'm happy to allow questions and then someone can come back and speak later. So I'm also happy for people to ask questions and speak at the time, but I'll try and note which is which. So I note that you've asked questions alone. Councillor Elder.
Maybe a question to Sue or Sandy. It is my impression that Kai Tahu have changed their sort of operating model and are looking to also co-invest in things around Otago and Dunedin. Is that true?
They are giving a commitment that they will match funding. So if we put in an amount of money, 250 years has been proposed, they would match that for services involving the Dunedin City Council.
No, my question was they're looking for opportunities to invest in like buildings or whatever.
That is different. This is
Okay.
Akaha, so we are working in a different capacity with Tranche, which is
Okay.
separate from this.
Cool, thank you.
Councillor Laufiso.
Your Worship, to echo Councillor O'Malley in previous debates, this was for me a no-brainer, of course. I'd like to thank Councillor Hawkins for moving. And I recall the long-term plan process 2 years ago now, is it? I don't know. Or maybe it was last year, but I remember asking the Ngāi Tahu rakatika that came to us. And in my opinion, and from my perspective, it was very gracious of mana whenua to do so. And they delicately, subtly, as Polynesians are wont to do, make a statement from their perspective, and it's up to us to actually understand what is being asked. Maybe if race relations were different in this country, and in the history of our country, they wouldn't have to have been so subtle. But I did ask for guidance as tauiwi, as an elected representative, what, in your sense, what advice do you have for us as tauiwi, given that we have so-called legal authority over your rohe? What is your advice to us in terms of partnership? Because that's what you're signalling. And I'm very, very pleased that they came back and actually gave us, instead of waiting another 10 years perhaps, they came and gave us an outline for what partnership for them looks like. And let's be very clear that Te Treaty o Waitangi is not the Treaty of Waitangi as local government and the central government deals with. They say very different things. So as far as I'm concerned, partnership is a way to go, and partnership, as far as I understand, was what was envisaged by the rangatira who signed Te Treaty o Waitangi. They were excited to learn from the British settlers. They did not expect, I think, the number of settlers that would come and occupy and take over. So I think it's an exciting vision and it's an exciting decision for us to respond positively and hopefully. And let's be clear about Treaty of Waitangi settlements. In one settlement, when Mr. Bolger was running out his $1 billion fiscal envelope, whatever, tangata whenua all over the place have beneficently realised that if they were to settle for the full, or push for the full commercial value of their settlements, the country would be bankrupted. They have settled for, in some respects, less than 2% of the total commercial value of their assets. So I hope that my colleagues will have a sense of hope and trust and aroha for the people, all the people. Māori people in this area are not only the ancestral owners of the assets that we have control over, but they're also ratepayers.
Councillor O'Malley.
I'm supportive of this. I just actually acknowledge, that 250,000 onward paying is a fair chunk of money. So, but it looks like there's a lot of information being transmitted backwards and forwards, which has fleshed this out since the public presentation. So all I'm asking is, we're going to make a decision today, but can we have a report afterwards as to what's the underlying basis of this relationship? Cool.
Thank you. Councillor.
Sorry, if that is, can we make sure that something like that gets added in, because that way we'll be able to track it.
So add at the bottom, and the work programme be reported to council.
Yep. Councillor Lord.
Just got a question, sorry, for the Chief, or Sandy, whoever. So is it anticipated that this money will be just paid out of our accounts to their accounts, or how is it planned
It's
to be
anticipated by
administered?
me anyway that it would be for work done. So as we do work together, you work out how many hours it takes and you invoice, that we invoice accordingly. So we do a procurement with Okaha as the Kaitahu team of experts who work in this area, and then we work with them and they invoice us for work done on the, as they said, 50-50 split, shared work basis. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
So can I follow that up, Chief? In some ways that should read for funding of up to, because depending on what projects worked on together, we may not reach the quantum.
Yes, but we still have to put in a budget line. So the budget line will read 250,000 for this. Like anything else, it may not get spent.
Sure.
But
Okay. Councillor Gary.
I have a question. How are other councils doing this? What other examples are there of this kind of model?
Well, I know most of the major metropolitan councils have staff, have dedicated iwi sport units. The only one I know in any detail is back to Waitakere City Council, so one of the councils that made up Auckland, where in my team we had a team of 5 full-time staff who worked on relationships with our two iwi, which were Ngāti Whātua and Te Kaurau Amaki. I know Auckland now combined, it's considerably larger than that, and I'm also aware Wellington, Christchurch, I don't know about Tauranga, have similar, our resourcing here is modest by metro standards. I think that would be fair.
Just add to that, I know Ngāi Tahu have made similar requests of authorities across the region as part of the various annual plan processes that are underway. I don't know the outcome of those, though.
Councillor Benson-Pope. Right. Councillor Wilson.
I'm just wondering whether this should actually be 500,000 and credit back for the 250, recognising the partnership as we would do if it was an NZTA budget, because that's how we.
Yeah, no, because they're not going to give us back a grant. We're just going to invoice for our half of the work. So the simplest way I think is to put this in as 250 for our half of the work. It's a shared work program, the same as we do with other things.
Not a
Where it's a
revenue
shared
stream.
work
Okay,
program.
thank you.
Okay. So that seems to be all the questions, and there's been a couple of speakers. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Your Worship. I listened really carefully when Tahu Potiki came to speak to us about this, and what I heard him say reminded me that in my local runanga, I've sat on a board with one of the people who was involved with this, and how difficult it was to satisfy all of the requests that they had to help organisations to meet their treaty obligations. What I heard Tahu say was that this would allow consistency and an ability to respond quickly, because they would be able to retain specialist people in the team to respond to the very large amount of work that we have ahead of us. I find it really disappointing to have a colleague bring in mention of the iwi representatives on the ORC, and I say I'm disappointed because some of the response to that has been really saddening, and all it does is to draw attention and engage or attract people to comment negatively about that. So I think that's disappointing. This is very positive. And also we know that Ngāi Tahu has come to us and said separately that they are really keen to invest in our area. And I recall going to a tangi, I guess it was 2 years ago, 18 months ago now, where Ngāi Tahu said that in fact they had been asked locally about investing in this area, and they have been true to their word and shown that as being really important, and have articulated that. This should not be something that becomes controversial, and I would be really disappointed in our community if it suddenly becomes an attraction for negative comment. This was a very reasonable request. It was given sound basis. We were given the reasons why at the time if we'd listened carefully, and it's been offered as a co-investment, so I will be supporting it.
Councillor O'Malley.
I'm basically following up with Councillor Fiso's comments. A lot of the wealth of this country is generated on breaches and bad behaviour, and so we are now going through a phase in our country of trying to mend those open wounds, and we have to basically reach out and do our bit on either side. So all I'm just making sure is that when we shell out 250,000, we know what we're shelling it out for. But I think it really reflects an interrelationship, and Okaha do a really good job, by the way. They do some exceptionally high quality work. So we're not talking about an organisation that hasn't demonstrated its ability already as well. So I'm happy to support.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
I thank people for the positive comments, and I think it's important to observe that how lucky we are. Not only that we've been, in the words of the Chief Executive, modest, I think rather minuscule might be more appropriate in terms of our financial commitment in this area, but we're also very fortunate that we are in a position that's not typical in New Zealand of having one iwi, collective iwi to deal with, which makes our lives and their lives, no doubt, somewhat easier. But that said, some of the involvement currently has been mentioned, but this has been an issue for decades. And I think Councillor Hawkins' teacher's T-shirt is quite apposite. Just like we expect millennials of his kind to be able to fix our software problems, and unsuccessfully, mind you, we also expect people with iwi associations or Māori background to be able to do for free what other people are employed for.
And we know this has been an ongoing problem in local government and other parts of the community for decades. So I welcome this move in response to the submission, to face up to our responsibilities in a more productive, comprehensive way. And I'd also remind councillors of the commitments that have come to us in the long-term plan discussion and in the annual plan about the level and the depth of involvement and the attitude from iwi in Dunedin to co-involvement or mutually advantageous involvement in all sorts of projects. We can all think of several right now where we are in or have been in discussion with Kaitahu about things that are mutually beneficial, be it housing, be it issues around the local advisory group in the hospital, be it other developments in construction mostly, and training. So this is something we should have done a long time ago, and thank goodness we're doing it now.
Councillor Elder.
I had the privilege of going up to the Eastern Bay recently and seeing that two cultures woven together beautifully, with schools, with the gateways all beautifully carved with marae. It was a living culture in the environment, and I'm looking forward to seeing us weaving together so that with this partnership there will be threads of the Māori culture shown in our society, in our streets, in our parks, and in even the infrastructure work. I believe our Māori culture needs to be seen and to be interwoven with what we do. So I'm really supportive of this, and I think it will give people a sense of pride in seeing their own culture reflected back at them.
Councillor Wilson, I note you put your hand up again, and
I've asked questions, I haven't spoken to it.
well, I've got you down here twice, but anyway, Karen, have you got another question? Or do
No,
you want
no, to speak to it,
Right,
speak to
okay.
it, sorry. Which I wasn't going to do, but I want to acknowledge that we have gone through a very extensive strategic framework, and throughout that whole process we consulted with Ngā Tahu, and they gave their time considerably for free. We're about to start on the process of of reviewing those, and I don't think we can expect that same buy-in again for no return. And I just want to reflect on a report that we got earlier this week, and I'm sure you all read the charcoal blue comment, but there's a wonderful comment in the summary, and I just want to repeat it. It's talking about the Dunedin market as a study in apparent contradictions, and the paragraph was, its Māori and Pacifica population is smaller than the national average, yet the Otipoti mana whenua in Kaitahu is culturally important and one of the most significant voices in the community. And that's someone else's insight into having gone through a considerable consultation process, and where Kaitahu, again, consulted for free in that process. And it's just one of those snippets of how important they are. We can't expect it to not to be done for free, but it is a really important voice, and I'm thrilled that we're going to be assured that we're going to be able to get that input in the future by funding for it.
Well, I'll be supporting this resolution. A bit of context here. All over the country, settlements are being finally resolved. And what we're finding, and what councils are finding, is that as locally we reach settlement, their attention turns from the national picture to the local one, which is their place, their whenua. And they've got some resource to back them up, but what they're finding is that in many cases they're not experienced enough, they've never done this, they've never engaged with their council very well before. They're finding that they, despite the fact that they're resourced, they're not sure about the steps. And the councils are finding the same thing. So that right across the country, there's this not jostling, just working through how local councils and local communities engage with their local iwi now that their iwi have finally got up off their knees and got a bit of resource. And in almost every case that I've observed, it's been done with extremely good will, albeit that they've got to work through how they engage with each other. I guess in that context, I think about the submission we got, the long-term plan from Ngāi Tahu, which I would point out came from at both an iwi level, a commercial level, as a corporate, and at a runaka level. They said we want to engage on all levels, and in the commercial level, we've as has been referenced, we've been doing some talking, and they want to collaborate more. But I would note that over the past few years, certainly in my time as mayor, they have done considerably more for us when we have asked them to, for no recompense, than we have ever done for them. There's very, very few occasions when we have a delegation from overseas, and they're not just the city delegations, they're all sorts, that they provide a pōwhiri, they provide often a waiata group. There's often 10 or 12 of them. And to be quite honest, in most cases, and I'm probably a bit ashamed to say this, we don't even provide koha. They just do it. And so they've been putting a considerable resource our way, one way or the other, and I'd have to say it's a resource which is greatly appreciated by both us and by visitors. That's just one example of what they have done. Another example is the fact that when things come through the Māori Participation Working Party and there needs to be some work done on them, in some cases, Ōkaha has just gone and done it. Work that our staff don't have to do, they've put skilled resource into, and again, if there's koha, that's the best of it. They're often not recompensed for it. So this is hardly a one-way street, and they've come to us and said, let's match funding. We've got things to do together. And I fully support that, if only to make up for perhaps what we haven't provided in the past. But as our relationship gets better and gets fuller, and as we seek to express our mana whenua presence in the things that we do around the city, whether it's the Central City upgrade or anywhere else, we've got to work with them in a way that just doesn't take them for granted, because they've got every right to that expression as everybody else has. Councillor Hawkins, you're right to reply.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and I'd like to thank colleagues for the support for this. It's heartening that the, albeit predictable, negative responses are such a small minority of this elected body. One of the things that I've found the most heartening, really, in my time in this organisation is the strengthening relationship that we have with mana whenua here, both at an operational, internal level and at a political one. And this is just a further evolution of that, and putting some money in. This is in a particularly Ōkaha in particular is a stretched organisation, and now they've got to turn around and give feedback on 300 soon-to-be expired water permits at the Otago Regional Council. They're a busy office. Councillor Van has asked what this money is going to be for, and that has been traversed, but it is things like fulfilling our legal requirements under the RMA. We're also looking at developing, obviously, and redesigning our central city area, hopefully as something slightly less of a colonial museum, to say nothing of, still, sadly, the disproportionate social wellbeing challenges that our local Māori population face in the city. I didn't answer that in my opening remarks because I think to a large degree I don't think in the spirit of partnership it's up to us to decide what the money is to be used for. This is a conversation with Kai Tahu to have around what that work program will be, and I look forward to that coming back to this organisation for noting as opposed to approval. Because the treaty grievance industry has been raised, I do want to put that in something of perspective. The entire sum of treaty settlements paid out over the last 25 years is roughly equivalent to 2 months of our national superannuation bill. That is the sum total. And if you want to talk about the treaty settlement being the end point and move on and get on with it, I have to remind people that just over 20 years ago, when the Ngāi Tahu settlement was signed off, the very next day, Arai Ture Marae and the Ngāi Tahu Māori Law Centre were burned to the ground. So forgive me if I don't think that it's time for us, Councillor Vandervis, to move on, because clearly our community and our society hasn't. And so I appreciate the support from, all other speakers to this motion, and I look forward to the work that comes out of it. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Division, please.
So, division. Okay.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Aye.
Councillor Elder.
Aye.
Councillor Gary.
Aye.
Councillor Hall.
Aye.
Councillor Hawkins.
Aye.
Councillor Fiso.
Aye.
Councillor Lord.
Aye.
Councillor Vandervis.
No.
Councillor Newell.
Aye.
Councillor O'Malley.
Aye.
Councillor Steadman.
Aye.
Councillor Wiley.
Yes.
Councillor Wilson.
Aye.
Mayor Cull.
Aye.
Has it come up? There it goes. Motion carried 13-1.
Thank you, it's carried. Okay, let's move on to down the list. You've got the list. The next one is the Broad Bay Boating Club. Councillor Wiley.
Your Worship, I'm happy to move this one, noting that it's $110,000 and their request was in dollar all in kind.
Okay, just have you noted that Councillor Gary has stepped back? Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Right, so are you? Am I hearing that you are specifying that in the resolution?
Correct.
Right, thank you. So just to be clear, your resolution is that the 110K that be contributed in either financially or in kind to the efforts of the Broad Bay Boating Club rebuild project. Is there a seconder? Councillor Hall. Okay. Can I invite you, Councillor Wiley, to speak to this?
Questions?
Yes. Oh, yes. Okay. Actually, that's probably a cleaner way of doing it. So thank you for asking. Councillor O'Malley. Just to be clear, councillors, let's do all the questions.
Hearing the words in kind, would that include then consent, like building consent fees to be basically waived and that kind of thing?
I would see it, and actually hadn't thought of it in that way, but noting the comments from the submission and what was taken in minutes from it, I actually looked at it more in the kind of the toilets and having public access to toilets and locker rooms out there. And that was detailed in the notes here. And I would agree with you, yes, that actually is another good way of doing it with costs, RMA costs, in-house costs.
Jenny, do you have a contribution?
Well, if I may, having not seen the resolution and so appreciating that this is in short measure, an in-kind contribution is challenging for us. To measure the value of it, because certain things, some of the stuff that we think that they might require, having read their submission, would involve us having to get consultants in potentially, which is costly. A far cleaner way to do this from an opposite point of view would be to determine a level of grant that councillors are happy with, if any, and do it by way of a grant. Because for us to do it, when we're the regulator, we're potentially compromised, but also we would likely have to resource this through consultants, and that may not be the best use of the funding you're wanting to give them.
Okay.
I'm happy to work down that pathway.
So just so Jenny knows what she's putting down and will ultimately put up on the screen, you're moving that council contribute $110,000 to support the Broad Bay Boating Club rebuild project.
Yes, Your Worship, I would also like to add to that, or have something noted to the fact of public toilet access.
Right.
Can we just deal with that as an officer issue?
Actually,
We've dealt with the Chingford ones, that's done,
Can
and
I
they're
just point
stone.
out that actually that's not something we're giving them, that's something we're expecting back in recompense, if you like. So probably might be best to leave it off there. So keep it simple.
Perfect, I'm happy with that.
But I'm sure that our hard-nosed negotiators will manage to get the dunnies into the deal if they can.
Sandy's just saying we don't need to just give $110,000, that you've got to have MOUs and you've got to have, so we actually need to sit down to think about what this might mean.
And how you did it.
And why they're not applying to any of the existing grant funds and stuff, so this is problematic.
We're just more, in terms of process.
Yeah,
we
so
need
can
to
you
be-
just give us 5 minutes to work that through?
Or we could wait.
Hang on.
We can do them all at
Or
the end.
we could wait and do them all at the end. But this one's,
But if there's any others that
I
you
like
want
this.
us to
So
look at.
I'm happy to give it a bit of advice, because clearly we don't just give $110,000.
We're just exploring a mechanism.
Right. I'm going to move that we adjourn for 5 minutes to give the staff time to give me instructions. Second to Councillor Benson Pope. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Carry.